Is a stark contrast. In recent weeks, we've seen tens of thousands of Gazans packed at the fence. Why is it a different story so far today?
Yes, you can see just behind me, our cameraman Michael is going to take you to the scene behind me where the conflict seems to be just starting to really escalate as these protesters have emerged from Friday prayers. We can see they've been charging the fence. Earlier, we heard an exchange of live fire. We saw white smoke emerge into the air, and that was tear gas being emitted by the IDF over these protesters in an attempt to try to push them back from the fence, a technique we saw used last week as well, which seemed to be effective for some time, though we do still see the plumes of smoke emerging into the air. Those are from the tire fire set, and this has really marked the March of Return. It is the symbol of the March of Return, these clouds of black smoke that are casting a thick, toxic black cloud over the farmers in the area and are really a sign of this protest as it continues to escalate.
But what are the big concerns for today's protest? The IDF is finding itself under increasing international scrutiny for its live use policy. What's at stake today?
Well, yes, this week we saw the death of another journalist who was shot in the crossfire. He succumbed to his wounds this week. So it was something that marked the week and something that was spoken about a lot on social media and in Arabic media, that this protest today would be a stand for his death and mark his life, excuse me, and the fact that he died in the field. And yes, it did grab international attention and brought the focus back to this march, which is we're going to see escalation continue into the coming weeks as it's expected to meet up and continue into May, the middle of May, which marks Nakba Day and also coincides with the Trump embassy move.
All right, stay with us, Emily. I want to bring Sean into this conversation from an IDF defense perspective. What are their concerns today? In recent weeks, we've seen kites with flaming Molotov cocktails attached, tire burning, stone throwing, although they're far away. What kind of clash tactics may we see today?
Right. I don't expect a major change in terms of new methods being brought to the fore here. It's still a very complex sort of challenge for the IDF to deal with in terms of these kinds of quantities, even if today we're speaking about relatively fewer, but still it's very early. We've tended to see over the past few weeks that it really only gets to the peak of violence, let's say, around 4, 5, maybe even 6 p.m. Israel time. And it's a certain pattern that we've seen develop also is that we only get details about, for example, who may have been hit, who may have died into the evening hours. For example, the revelation that a 15-year-old child was killed last week, or the revelation that a journalist was killed the week before. This tends to only come to the fore or emerge later in the day, and it's often making headlines on Saturday.
Emily, give us a sense, what's it like to be there covering this? We know that the IDF tends to move journalists around for safety reasons. What can you hear? What do you smell? What's it like to be, to try and get a safe position, because these clashes every week have turned deadly?
Yes, Jeff, that is a cause of concern here. We tried to get a closer position, but the military often declares regions around the border as a closed military zone, depending on the situation. And we have to remember what you're seeing behind me is one position of the protests, but there are several others located along the border, and the IDF makes those calculations on the ground, though it is a constant struggle to balance between the safety and as well trying to capture the images behind us. Yes, that is a growing cause of concern.
All right, and Shai, I mean, just again, the images right now of several, probably a few thousand, not tens of thousands. Mm-hmm. The heat of this starts in the late afternoon hours into the early evening, and that's when we may see a big increase in the presence.
Correct. That's the pattern that we tend to see. There tends to be a pickup in the level of violence as the day progresses. Again, one of in terms of the IDF approach to this challenge, certainly there's an emphasis on the use of force, the emphasis of the use of live fire, which has been very controversial. We have asked the question, why not use more rubber bullets? The IDF saying that when it comes to the ranges involved with this particular scenario, rubber bullets simply aren't effective. They're only effective to a distance of up to 100 meters. Sometimes it appears that the IDF is shooting at distances that are greater than that. That is in itself you could say controversial. The Deputy Defense Minister, who we spoke to this week, noted that the directives are to shoot below the knee. But what happens often is that some of these Palestinian youths, when they hear the shots ring out, they tend to duck, hit the ground, take cover, and that perhaps puts them in greater danger in a sense, perhaps even exposing other body parts to injury.